What up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Black Expat Podcast, Taiwan On Edition, coming at you guys live from somewhere around the world. I'm Carl, and I'm excited to be here with you guys today. But you guys know what time it is. Before I get into all the amazing stuff we're talking about today, have a drink with me. All right, you guys know I bring you guys amazing guests from all over the world from amazing places. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Jordan Tobe, aka JT. I hope I can call her JT. I kind of just threw that out there and didn't let her know. But I'm excited to be doing with Jordan Tobe. And enough of me talking about her. I will allow her to introduce herself, where she's from, and just, what makes her the awesome person that I know that she is.
Hi, Carl. Thanks for having me. Yeah, JT's cool. Jordan, whatever you want. So I'm Jordan Tobe. I am from Pittsburgh. I know Carl because we work together at Pack Up and Go. So love traveling, love talking about traveling, love talking about myself. So excited to be here.
And while we're on the topic of traveling, where are some of the amazing places you've traveled to around the world? Like, what are the standout places when you meet somebody and you're out and introduce yourself and they're like, hey, where have you been? Where do you start and where have you been?
I'm super lucky. I've been a lot of places. I got to study abroad in Europe. So I lived in Prague for a little bit and kind of traveled around Eastern Europe a lot. And then after school, after working for a couple of years, I actually went and lived in Thailand. So got to travel around Southeast Asia for a while. And so usually I'd say Thailand and Southeast Asia is where I start because I feel like it makes me cool. But I have a lot of really cool experiences that I feel really lucky to have had.
Now, I've been to Thailand. I don't know if you knew this, but I've been to Thailand about 10 times. For those of you guys that have been to Thailand, I've taken tour groups there, not just me going to Thailand because I love it so much. I do like it a lot. Now, visually, when you think of Thailand, and I don't know if you remember before you went versus after you went, what did you visualize and what came to your mind when you thought about Thailand?
Before I went, I was like beaches, like islands and beaches and Bangkok. That was pretty much like the image I had in my mind. So like massive, huge city with everybody on motorbikes and like beautiful Thai islands. Those were kind of like the images I had in my mind. Wasn't really expecting to be placed in like rural middle of nowhere Thailand for teaching. So it was a whole different experience, but that was sort of the image I had before. Is that what you pictured?
Absolutely not. Okay, so a little bit of history about that. When I went to Thailand, it was 2010. Jordan, I had never taken a trip with like by myself. Like, I went abroad with like school and stuff like that, but like a vacation trip in another country just by myself on my own. I didn't do it by myself though. My friend Brad planned most of it, but I was like, okay, it's gonna look just like Taiwan because that's all I knew. I was like, oh, Thailand, yeah. He's like, it's gonna have good food, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
I had no idea about the beaches, the beautiful water, none of that. We took a train from where we coming from Cambodia to Taiwan. So my first visual of Thailand was being covered in soot because we took an open door train and we went through the farm areas and there was a fire and all the soot. And I had a white Jordan shirt. I'll never forget it, a white Jordan shirt on, Michael Jordan, not Jordan shirt.
Right.
And it was just black by the time we landed. So I had a terrible introduction to Thailand, and that's what I remembered about it. It was crazy.
Wow. Yeah. I'm not shocked. Like, I never had that experience, but I feel like everything that happened to me in Thailand was kind of just like 100% like flipped on its head from what I was picturing in all the best ways at the end of the day. But I'm not shocked that was your introduction to Thailand because I feel like it's just like a totally different world from what any of us are used to.
It is. And before I get into that, guys, I'm sorry. I know you guys have been looking at this amazing picture of me on this glass and looking at me and Jordan taking sips of amazing drinks. And we didn't introduce the drinks. I do apologize. Jordan,
Right.
May I ask, what are you drinking in your glass today?
This has been my specialty lately, an extra dirty martini with vodka, not gin.
Oh, okay. See, vodka martinis are so much better. People don't get that.
I agree.
Now, when you say a dirty martini, what makes it dirty?
The olive juice. And I say extra dirty because I'm like almost more olive juice than vodka kind of person over here. I really, really like the saltiness.
That's actually good. See, I'm really into pickle juice, and people are always like, why do you take pickle juice shots? I'm like, first of all, pickle juice is really good for you. Probably didn't know that, but it actually is. So
Okay.
drink more pickle juice, guys. But also, yeah, I don't know. I like pickles, and I like salty things. Guys, last time I was drinking a dark, it was called a dark, sexy, and rich beer on the first episode. I'm sorry, y'all, I'm not drinking that today, even though those are the things I aspire to be. I'm already 2/3 of that. Y'all guess which ones I am? All right. I'm not going to answer that question. All right. And then I'm drinking, it's called a Devil's Backbone. It is a real ale. If you've been following me for a long time, you know I love pale ales. I love ales. I love darker beers. This is one of them. And it's called the Devil's Backbone because it's strong as hell, y'all. I'm going to be drunk after 3 more sips. And back to the interview. Jordan, I had no idea that you were a teacher in Thailand.
Yeah. We never talked about this?
No.
I was, yes, for 6
What
months.
what grade level did you teach? Like, what was it like? Because of course, you know, I taught in Taiwan, but like, what was it like teaching in Thailand?
Oh, it's a really amazing experience. I taught kids all the way from like the equivalent in the U.S. to like from like 7th grade to 12th grade, essentially.
Okay.
And but I will say, just like kind of as a caveat for your listeners, that had I done a little bit more research and learned a little bit more, I may not have done the same experience that I did. I did a 6-month stint in Thailand teaching, and I looking back now that I know what I know about the education system there, I know that these kids get new English teachers just like thrown at them every semester, and a lot of the times we're not like super well trained and well prepared, and so I think that a lot of the times they're sort of like starting back at square one. So for me personally, going into it, there was a big learning curve for like, I don't know what level these kids are at. I was teaching English. So I didn't know what level. And honestly, I taught like all levels and I didn't really realize that at the time. And I had it took me a while to gauge like where they were and where to start. And so it feels a little unfair to the students that they're like consistently just like getting these new teachers in and out the door who aren't the best equipped for teaching them. So I will give that little caveat. But I adored it. I adored like getting to build relationships with my students. The Thai people in general are just like the most helpful, kind people in the world that I've come across. And my students were no exception to that. They were just like so sweet. They adored me, which was a ton of fun. And just getting to like form those personal relationships. I feel like even if I wasn't the greatest English teacher in the world, I definitely was able to kind of like be an adult figure in their life that was like fun and different than what they were used to.
You know, and that makes complete sense. I think the story I always tell about how I ended up teaching, I said I never intended on being a teacher. It was not on my vision board, on my Ouija board. It was nowhere in like
No
my
boards.
life's plan. It wasn't there. I was a tutor and all that before I went abroad, but I literally fell in love with teaching. And I know it's kind of hard to say now, like I knew I had to transition out of it after more than a decade doing it because I didn't have that same passion and drive that I had when I started. And I think that teaching is so demanding. And for genuine people who actually want to help people, which sounds you want to do, but you just had a shorter time being there,
Yeah.
like it's hard to just show up and then disappear, right? And I know being abroad and talking to other expats, that's what a lot of people do. They go for 1 or 2 years and they leave. But what's kind of left out is, yeah, you had an amazing experience doing these amazing things, but you know, there's people whose lives you've kind of impacted them. And I was fortunate to stay in a place where I really, really liked, but I also knew that when I left when it was time for me to leave, and I didn't like disrupt any lives, I hope, when I was doing it. But enough about that. I do want to play a little game now. I'm going to take a sip of this Devil's Backbone. Again, until I'm sponsored, you guys, I'm not saying who makes this beer. If you make it and you're watching this video, please feel free to send me money and I will say your name. But until then, no,
same with the
you.
vodka company. They can sponsor me if they want to.
All right, play one. It's a new game I just made up in my head 20 minutes ago. It's called Countries. So instead of me asking you about, what more countries have you went to? We're just going to go up to 10. We're going to go back and forth for the countries, only the countries you've been to. Right.
Okay.
But you can't say one that I said. So if I've been to the same place, you have to say a new one.
Oh,
right?
shoot. Okay.
Are you ready? All right, I'm going to go first. Actually, no. That's unfair. I'll let you go first.
Okay.
Right. You ready?
Thailand.
Whenever you're ready.
Thailand.
Taiwan. Yes.
Cambodia.
Japan. That was my second one.
Vietnam.
Singapore.
Prague.
Italy. Yeah.
Austria.
Australia. Thank you for helping me.
Hungary.
New Zealand.
Spain.
Damn, that was my next one. And I lose.
That was harder than I thought.
I should have said America. Why did I just say
Oh
no? It's
yeah.
not. I should have said. Oh, okay.
I'm half Canadian and I forgot about that part.
I really like that game. All right. Now, first of all, okay, where do I want to start? Hungary. What is that like? I wanted to go there. Never been there. What was that like?
Oh, I went to Budapest. So I'm
Okay.
not like an expert on Hungary, but I did go to Budapest. So when I was in Prague, I did Vienna and Budapest in the same trip. Budapest was really cool. It was really beautiful. Eastern Europe as a whole. So I'm Jewish. I don't know if I've ever mentioned that, but I'm Jewish. And Eastern Europe has so much history, so much Jewish history, especially sadly surrounding the Holocaust and World War II. And so I'm also a history nerd. And so that for me was like a big part of that trip was just kind of like going down the history path of like where relatives may have like areas where relatives may have lived or visited and understanding like the history of what happened in that city, especially to the Jewish people. And so that was a big part of that trip. But also, Eastern Europe in general is just really cool. It's really beautiful. I mean, like all of Europe, it's super historic and just like the charm of like the stone roads and the colorful buildings. I felt like Budapest, Prague, and Vienna kind of all had that, like really pretty like squares in the cities. So really cool trip.
You know, like I've been to Europe, a few places, but I've never. I mean, and I know a few Black expats and just people in general who've been to Eastern Europe, but and they all say a bunch of amazing things about it. But honestly, I just I've never researched it enough to go on my own. So I'm always happy when I talk to people who've actually been there and can kind of shed light on the uniqueness of it. So that way it's in my mind more for me to actually get to those places. Again, pandemic slowed all that down. I was supposed to do all of Eastern Europe and
Yeah.
all of South America, but you guys know the world shut down. Yay. So but enough about that. What were some of the hard lessons? And when I say hard lessons, it's like, okay, I'll give an example. One thing I learned from traveling was the benefit of being an American when I first started traveling, and what that meant, and how people would react differently to me when they saw me versus when before I said words, they'd be like. Then when I
Mm,
started speaking, they're like, "Oh, English, America," and I'm like, "Yeah." I'm sorry about the accent, child. I'm not making fun of nobody. I just made up one in my head. That's sometimes how I talk. So yeah, don't cancel me, y'all will be okay. So like, what were some of the hard lessons that you learned from traveling, or one or two, or if
yeah.
like if you have any?
Yeah. I think that's a good question. I think this kind of ties into what I was saying about going and teaching English for only 6 months. I think understanding the impact that you make by being a tourist was a hard lesson for me. So, living in Thailand in a more rural town where there weren't tourists, I really got to know the local culture like very well, and it was me who had to fit into the culture. I had to make sure for example, when I was there, the king of Thailand had just passed away, and the whole country was in mourning. So I was only really to wear black. People were really only wearing black because they were in mourning. So it would have been disrespectful for me to show up wearing like colorful, like floral tourist clothes. In the midst of something so tragic for the country. So I really had to fit into the culture and make sure that I was respectful of where I was and the people that were around me. But then if I would have, a weekend where I would get to go to like visit a Thai island, I would kind of look around me and realize how unintentionally disrespectful all the tourists were being. And I was like, it wasn't for me to feel like defensive, but part of me kind of felt, like we kind of have this duty to understand where we're traveling and what's going on there so that we can be respectful. And like the kind of just like loudness and the party nature, and the Thai people are naturally just like a relatively like calm and quiet culture. And so I think that was one of the hard lessons, was having to digest that, like, yes, I am a tourist, and also I need to make sure that I can like be respectful at the same time. But I always like want to blend into whatever culture I'm visiting, and I know that's not always possible.
You're absolutely right. Because one of the interesting things, well, my sisters came visit me in Austin, and my fiance, she's Taiwanese, and we went to one of her friends' um, house parties, and it was just a bunch of people from Taiwan, and mostly all of them are from Taiwan except us and their significant others, right? But they had like KTV and in their home, like connected to their television, which is karaoke, and they were like drinking and eating and singing, but they sang karaoke the entire night. And I was just talking to my sister, and I was like, she was like, this is," and she wasn't. She was like, "This is so much fun," and I was like, "Yeah, it is." But it was like it's so different from our parties because we play cards. We'll play, they had beer pong set up in the garage, but like we play cards, we laugh and joke. We eat and drink as well, but like the social aspect is just so different. And I
Yeah.
was like, yeah. And she was like, "Is this how you always partied in Taiwan?" And I was like, "No." It was like, "Well, what did you do?" I was like, "Oh, there are clubs and areas like that, but I feel like that's definitely just for tourists.
Right.
Whereas that's not culturally where local people would usually, like, local people still go, of course, because it's there. But culturally, it's not how they celebrate with their families and their friends. Usually, it's
Yeah.
usually more karaoke based. This is so fascinating just to think about that.
Yeah.
Question?
And I think, sorry.
No, no, no. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I think that it's a really interesting aspect to be able to find ways to insert yourself into the culture. Even if you still want to, like when I was in Prague, I definitely was like at the clubs, being a total American student and like doing all the American things in Prague. But I also found a group of students to tutor. So I guess teaching has always sort of been there in the background for me. But I found a group of students to tutor and I did it in their home. And so I would like take public transportation to a different part of the city and go teach them and work with them and hang out with the parents. And it was a totally different experience. And again, it was like me, I don't speak your language, I don't speak Czech. So I'm kind of like wanting to be respectful and not just be like speaking English to everybody and trying to practice the Czech that I learned. And so I think finding ways to insert yourself, especially if you're somewhere a little bit longer term, is a really cool way to do that while still understanding that you're a tourist.
Absolutely, man. Fascinating stuff. Now, I do want to go shift us a little bit. Similar question, different topic. When I was growing up, it was weird because I didn't think about this until 2 weeks ago. That's why I love podcasting, because it always gets me in a different mindset. My earliest memory of travel, like in understanding that there was more to the world than the community that I lived in, was when my dad, because he was like the vice president of a bank when I was younger, and they sent him to London. And like he came, and I didn't. They were always going to London. I was like, yeah, and I was a kid. I'm like, I don't know what London is. Sounds cool. Then he brought me back like the London guards that stand outside of the Queen's house, the little red guys with the little hat. And that's when I realized, like, oh, he's going to another part of the world. That seems so cool. But I couldn't visualize what that even was. And back then there weren't photos and things like that. He had to get them developed, and I never saw them. Or maybe
Right.
I did, and I just forgot. But that was my earliest memory of like travel being introduced to me. And I came from a family that traveled a lot domestically, but like before I was born. Like once I was born, it was like, oh, we're going to Florida, we're going to Wisconsin Dells, we're going somewhere where you guys can get away from me because I want my kids to have fun. Like, what's your earliest memory of travel? And then and how did your family react to your ambition and your drive and your want and need to go to these different countries? Because, like, I mean, you're their daughter and they're worried about you. Like, was it okay? Like, what was that
Yeah.
entire experience for travel like for you, family wise?
Yeah. I know this comes from a super privileged place, so just want to note that first. But my family has traveled together since like pretty much as far back as I can remember. So I don't even have a specific time that was like, oh, this is the first time I realized like you could leave. Like it was very much just like part of what we did. And I've talked to my parents about it, and it was really important to them when they had kids that they continued to travel. And that was sort of like when they saved money and when they like made plans, it was like very much around being able to continue to travel. So I feel really lucky about that. So I don't know that I have like a first memory of travel, but it's funny because my sister was just home and we were talking a lot about how much we traveled as kids. And it just reminded me of this when you were talking about London, of like having that realization of like, I don't know where London is. We realized that as much as we got to travel as kids, and we did like we got to go to Mexico quite a bit. We did Spain when I was relatively little. We did like the west coast of Canada in an RV, which was, now looking back, like one of the coolest trips ever. But at the time, I was like 12 years old and I was kind of like, why don't we just go to the beach like a normal family? And we were talking about that experience and we were telling our parents, like, we feel so lucky that they took us to all these places. But something we wish they would have considered was sort of explaining to us, like, this is why we're going to this place. This is a little bit about the history of the place. And I think that's where, tying this all together, I think that's where my kind of like drive for like, I want to go somewhere and I don't want to just visit it. I want to like live there and understand the culture. I think a lot of that came from being a kid and being like, okay, we're in Spain, but what does that even mean? You know, like I
Right.
don't know
Yeah.
where I am on the map. So, so yeah, I think travel was really important to my parents, but I think that I kind of like grew this like hunger for wanting to understand it more. And my parents were really supportive of that. They really, I didn't even realize it was a thing that people would be like worried about travel um, until I started telling people I was going to live in Prague or then Thailand, and they're like, "Are you sure? Is that safe?" And because my parents have always been really just like totally supportive of it. Was your family, when you said, "Hey, I'm moving to Taiwan," like how was your family about that?
I think, and it's something I told my mom about. I went to a very, when I was in grammar school, elementary school, like first to eighth grade, went to a very diverse school. So when we had like assemblies and stuff, we had like cultural nights where people from all, like, I didn't realize people in my class were from all over the world. So different flags, different foods, they did their, like everything was on display culturally. So I was introduced to different cultures very early on in my life. High school was very different. Went to an all black high school. It was great. Loved it. Great time. But first to eighth grade was just so culturally diverse for me. But when I decided to go abroad, my mother was like, well, my mother wasn't surprised. She's like, I knew you was going to leave. When I heard you were studying Chinese your freshman year of college, I figured somehow you'd migrate over there. But when I started learning the language, it's the conversation around I would have with family members would be like, hey, you need to use that. How are you going to put it? How are you going to make it work for yourself? How are you going to use that? And I was like, I mean, I'm just doing it now because I enjoy doing it. Because, college where you figure things out.
Yeah.
I didn't really see myself applying that language to a job and a skill. And honestly, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to just be learning the language just to use it for something other
Right.
than just living my actual life. So I didn't go into, the government or into specific company just to use that skill. I use it in a way to make myself fit into a different environment, a different country, and be successful and thrive. And I'm really proud of that for myself, that I didn't fall into what everybody else wanted me to do. I did kind of what I wanted to do. But my family was okay. My younger sister, I know, because my older sister and I are 5 years apart. My younger sister are 8 years apart. So I had time with my older sister. I had time with my younger sister. But I think for my siblings, they were just like, man, we wish you were here as the only boy of the family, that you
Yeah.
were always abroad. And you were abroad not just for like a year or two. You're gone for like 11 years.
Yeah.
So I think when I first went, they were like, oh, it's okay. Cool, cool. Then when I stayed, they're like, okay, he's never coming back.
They're like, "Come
We love
home."
you.
Yeah.
And now that I'm back, they're like, man, it's so good to be back. So I guess to answer your question, I don't know. I know that they supported me when I went, but I guess I'm kind of living and working through like the impact it's had on me and my family long term,
Yeah.
and the relations that I want to have with them. Like it's not a bad thing. It's just a reasserting yourself into like the familial life that we've had.
Yeah, you created like a full life. Like for me, it was like being gone for a year or even less for Europe. Like, but you had like the time to create a full life over there. So it's definitely different.
And it's crazy when you really think about it. Now I'm back home, which
Yeah.
sometimes don't really feel like home. But like,
Yeah.
what were some of the passions that that you discovered, and things that you took from your experiences abroad and brought back to you, and you inserted into your daily life now, whether that's personally or professionally, or just in goals that you've set for yourself now and moving forward?
Yeah. There's a few things that pop in my head when you ask that. So one is I remember being in Europe. I was like 20 years old and I was, like you said, in college, you're really just like learning and figuring things out. And I remember having this epiphany and telling my mom about it. And as I was saying it, I was like, this sounds so dumb, but it really like helped change me. I was like, I love just like leaving my apartment and just walking. And I think it was sort of an independence thing of like for the one of the first, even though I was, away at school and stuff, but like being in another country, being able to like leave my apartment and walk somewhere totally new and like take public transportation and like navigate that all by myself. I think it was just this like epiphany of like, wow, I get to decide how I spend my time and I can do it exploring. And I really wanted to make sure I brought that home with me in terms of like making sure that even though I was coming home to Pittsburgh, where I'm from, I could still like use that curiosity and explore maybe like parts of the city I wasn't familiar with, or go for walks and try to find things that I hadn't seen before. So I think I really took that with me. From my experience in Thailand, it was a little bit deeper, a little bit more on the spiritual side for me. And it was a lot of writing. I journaled nonstop on that trip. It was a lot of self discovery. I had kind of like decided that I didn't like the way my life looked and was like, all right, bye, I'm going to Thailand. Like just kind of like dropped it all and moved to Thailand. And I think that using travel as an escape can be good and bad, but I really did use that time for a lot of self-reflection. And so I like the practice of journaling. I've always journaled, but that was like when I was like, okay, this is essential in my life. And like reading and really understanding like history became really important to me. And those are things that I continue in my life now. And I didn't think I would end up in the travel industry, but clearly travel really had a hold of me. So a hold on me. So here I am, like I work in the travel industry. So I think, that was definitely a big impact on me as well. Planning a bunch of weekend trips for myself every single weekend. I didn't really like think that would be what I went into work-wise afterwards, but it turned out it was, and it was perfect for me.
And again, first of all, that was amazing. I have so many thoughts on that, but I kind of want to leave that gem there because that's going to be like the intro to this show. That was amazing. Y'all heard it and y'all watching it too. That was great, right? I know. I don't even know what to say. It's hard to follow and act like that, Jordan. I was going to take a drink before I keep going. Then
I'll join you.
Damn, that was good.
Thank you.
But what I think is so fascinating, what I know for me, I think because people are like, "Oh, you still have the Black Expat Podcast, but you're back home in America. Like, are you really an expat?" And I always frame it. I say, "Hey guys, I lived from 20 years old till now. I lived in another country, so like I am rediscovering America, and everything I do, I kind of still do through the lens of an expatriate because I'm always like I want to go back to Taiwan. I've always wanted to live in Taiwan 6 months and then live in America 6 months. Like I want to get back, not necessarily to do that now, but just to be back where I've been for so long." But one of the things that I think is interesting is that now that I'm back, I want to explore America. And it's interesting because the way in which people explore it and think about exploring America is just so different. And I've just learned from being back that I can still live like an expat per se. In America, I can spend 2 weeks in San Diego. I can spend 2 weeks or a month. So I can spend 6 months in a different place and kind of have that same feeling, that same lust and allure of being in a new place. Because as you know, working in travel, every place is different and has something special to offer. What has it been like working in travel and the way in which you work in travel during a pandemic? And how have you kept that spirit of travel is, because the reason why I say this is because some people who work in travel I've talked to have been like, the pandemic has kind of turned me away from it because, what's the point? And I'm like, what do you mean, what's the point? So it's like, how have you how has it impacted you?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, like I'm definitely not alone. I know like everyone was in it together in terms of just like during the like thick of COVID, I definitely had a moment where I was like, I can't stay in travel. This is too volatile. Like this is not okay. And I'm like LinkedIn searching, but obviously nothing is like exciting me because travel is such a huge passion of mine. And so working in travel during the pandemic was you have me at a loss for words because it was hard. It was hard. It was scary. It was definitely like there was a time when I was like, I just don't know if the travel industry can come back from this. I felt really fortunate to keep my job during the pandemic. And even more fortunate was that I work for a company with a founder and a CEO, who's just so fantastic and so transparent and so just brilliant, honestly. Like she's really brilliant, and she really kept us just like she kept us busy when there were no trips to book. We still had things to do. She kept a number of us employed, and she kept us motivated, and she kept us looking forward and really like seeing where we could go, and seeing, even if travel didn't bounce back the way it now has, seeing like what our possibilities were. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say it was fun or that I was like super optimistic, but But I feel really fortunate, I guess, is how I would frame it.
And I agree 100. Again, I wasn't, well, I was working in travel, but not really. I think it's just like my episodes and my shows. But one of the things that I think I learned from the pandemic was one, and I'm going to say this in reverse order, with the ability to pivot. Right, I was
Mhm.
able to pivot my podcast to kind of focus more on the lived experience of living in a different place. I think that was really good for me because it really put in perspective the way in which I wanted to live. That's where I got the idea of I can live in Taiwan and live in America for 6 months out of each year if I find something that works for me and allows me to do that.
Yeah.
And it was giving me the best of both worlds. I kind of realized what I wanted, what I was yearning for, not because of the pandemic, but even before that. Like I wanted to be around my family more. I was like, how can I make this work? And the solution kind of, it was forced upon me, right? I think it
Mhm.
affected everybody individually. But in regards to travel in general and how I kind of worked through it mentally, I guess for me, it was I was so much of an advocate and so rah rah, and even in our jobs now, it's like travel, and we're always trying to convince people and get the people to travel, and like and it's talking about why it's so amazing that when it was all taken away, I really had to sit back and reflect on, well, first, damn, the one thing I love, well, one of the things I love doing, I really can't do. S-
Mhm.
So now what? It's like I said, it's been so huge in my life and it's changed me in so many ways. Where can I get that same fulfillment from and doing what? And if I don't have this ever again in my life, because we didn't know when it was going to end or what was going to happen,
Yeah.
then like, what would I be doing? And it really made me think deeply about those things. And honestly, I'm still trying to kind of thinking about those things because
I'm with you.
like there's a lot of things that were going on before it. And I'm like, now I'm just like, okay, we're still in a pandemic, honestly. And I don't really have answers to those questions yet because part of me is like still scared. It's like, should
Yeah.
I take a risk? Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, no, maybe so. But now that we're kind of hopefully migrating out of the pandemic, are there any places that are on your list of places to go and things to do? Like, you know what? I had travel taken away from me for 3 years. Once it's back, hey, I'm back out here. Where
Yeah.
is back out here for you?
For sure. I mean, I definitely want to be totally transparent though. Like in the last, what is it now, like 2.5 years of not being able to travel, I definitely have like, I think lost a little bit of my spontaneity. Like I'm
Yeah.
feeling a little nervous about travel and I'm pretty much like 99.9% sure that as soon as I start again, I'm going to like catch the bug and not want to stop. But I have like a little bit of a hesitation, which is not like me. But one of the things that this kind of ties back to the previous question you asked me first that I really learned when I was in Thailand was how important it is to take yourself out of your comfort zone. It's like it's so cliche, and even just saying that, I was like rolling my eyes at it because it's pretty cliche. But I really understood that like if I stayed in the comfort that I was in prior to going to Thailand, I would have been stuck in a life that was fine, like and nobody wants to describe their life as fine. Um and so like taking myself out of my comfort zone really like elevated me to like my next level. So I have to remind myself that. I think when I think about getting back into traveling, and I will say I've been lucky. Like I've been able to travel around the states a bit during this time. So I've gotten to like scratch that itch a little bit here and there. But for me, next would be South America. Never been to South America, so never been like beyond Mexico, Belize, I guess would be the farthest I've gone in the Americas. But yeah, South America, would love to explore it. Would love to start to learn a little bit of Spanish first and then get to take a trip in South America. But also Australia, New Zealand. I honestly like I would probably just list every country I haven't been to. So, but South America, I would say, is probably the starting point. What about you?
Actually, that's the one place I haven't been. It was always too far away from Taiwan to like
Yeah,
justify me going to, but South America is. I want to do all of it. I want to just take a month or two and like live and experience it the way that kind of the way that I want it to. Before everything kind of went up in flames. But yeah, South America, and the thing is, same. Like I want to do Duolingo. Get my people are like, oh, you can't learn on Duolingo. Yes, you can, guys. Just try it. Don't knock it till you
you
try
can
it.
start. Yeah,
Like a heavy month long of like I'm doing 2 hours a day of Duolingo and then like hitting up my friends who speak different languages and talking to them. Because yeah, I do want to do South America and I want to be able to communicate basic things because that was my fear when I guess of traveling when I because I was able to go through most of you know, China and Pacific, specifically in Asia, and know a little bit of the language to get by in culture. But outside of that, I'm like, I want to go outside of that and really be, again, back in that mindset of I'm figuring it out. And you know, it's so interesting that you said that, because a lot of the greatest discoveries that I've talked to big people who've had big dreams, big ideas, and entrepreneurs and CEOs was like when they took themselves out of their comfort zone. And
Yeah.
I think people often kind of don't understand that you get so comfortable with your everyday job. And if you're in a job that it's the same thing every day and becomes monotonous, and it's and like you really can lose sight of yourself, and you just really kind of settle. And it's so weird how quickly a month and a year goes by. Like, I
Mhm.
feel like it was just January and now we're heading into May. It's almost the end of April. Like, and things just go by so quickly. So travel did, like, planning to travel was a big thing for me. It's like, all right, we're planning today. It was like a week long adventure,
Yeah.
just planning to travel. And then the anticipation, the build up and everything. So it really does change it. But when you don't have that, and you kind of have to figure out, all right, where does that come from when you can't even go outside? Like, well, you can't go to many places and dine. Like, that's
Right.
huge. It does really
Totally. And
impact
I
you.
think too, like, I'm a big proponent of like regulating your nervous system and being really in touch with your nervous system. And I feel like if every day you're going through life, like never giving like a little bit of a shock to your nervous system, when something happens, it's gonna
Mhm.
like shock you. But if you're like consistently finding ways to like shake it up a little bit, like make things a little bit uncertain, then when something unexpected happens, it's a little bit less shocking to your system. I don't know if that's like way off topic from what we're talking about, but that's sort of, I just feel like it's so important to make sure you're training yourself for these situations.
No, that makes perfect sense, because I feel like I'm operating in reverse. I feel like I was so used to seeking new things and experiences, and now I'm like, when I'm sitting there and I'm doing something, like, I want to do so much more, and I'm like, hey, everybody's like, hey, calm down, one day at a time. I'm like, no, that's not how I used to live. I used to live on the what? Like, I would literally in Taiwan just go out and walk around the street and find something I didn't know about, go find a new bar. But like here where I am now, yeah, I can go find a new bar, but it's such a long drive. Everybody's going to speak English. It's a new place, but it just didn't feel the same
Right.
to me personally. So yeah, I absolutely, absolutely agree with that. Like, spot on. What was, as we're winding down, what was something that you did in your childhood or when you were younger, like the younger version of yourself, that has always stuck with you and has had a big impact on how you've experienced travel, but also how you've experienced accomplishments in your personal and or professional life as well?
Hmm. Well, I went to summer camp, and I feel like for those people listening who didn't go to summer camp, they're like, okay. But to me, summer camp was like how I learned how to interact with people um, who were like in a really deep way, I guess is how I would put it. So, interacting with people from all over the country who maybe were coming from like different backgrounds from me. And we were like all of a sudden thrust into this environment where we lived together for 3 months or 2 months of the summer. And we were all young people with counselors, camp counselors who were in charge of us, but they themselves were like 16, 17 years old. And so like learning how to navigate that independence, I feel like really set me up for success in honestly in life, but also in traveling. Um, yeah, that's the best thing I can think of. Do you have a specific thing from your childhood?
Before I do and I don't.
Okay.
Same, but I've always speak transparency. I always wanted to go to summer camp. Mother never wanted to send me to damn summer camp. I was so mad because like I was like I had friends and stuff that were going. I'm like, why can't I go to summer camp? I'm not sending you nowhere with no strangers for 3 months. And I'm like, oh, but now I go halfway across the world. Sorry guys, I got really really emotional. But you guys see, I really want to go to summer camp. Like so many people just like don't know the benefits of it and how sending a kid to school is kind of the same thing. But like summer camp just sounds so much fun. Like, okay, I know this is not related to the question. I'm going to answer your question, I promise. But first, what did you guys do at summer camp? Like, like was
I
it
can't
somewhat
tell
was as
you.
much
It's a
fun as I
secret.
think it was? Like, I always wanted to go.
It was. It really was. It was, I mean, my summer camp was on a lake. So we did a lot of like water skiing and tubing and boat stuff. And then we had the coolest thing. I don't know if you've ever seen Heavyweights, the movie, like the Disney movie, but they had this like big, it's called the Blob. We had it at camp. It's called the Blob, and it's like one person jumps on the blob and scoots to the front. It's literally just a blob in the middle of a lake. So you jump on it, and then somebody else jumps on it and like rocket launches you off into the lake.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, so that was really fun. A little scary, but fun. We had like horses and horseback riding. We had arts and crafts. We had drama. We had swimming. We had, I mean, everything you can, archery, like everything you could imagine. And like, as like, sounds like it's from a movie, but it's really how it was. And I loved all the activities, but honestly, even more than that, like I said, was like navigating these like friendships and like young love and like all of the things from the movies. It was real.
Yeah, see, it's not right. So, guys, you guys have kids. Hopefully, if you watch my YouTube channel, you're of age. You may or may not have kids. Even if you don't have kids, I feel like there's an adult camp. Never mind, that sounds like something different. But yes, if there's an adult appropriate camp, you nasties, then make sure you guys go. Camp sounds like so much fun. I always wanted to go, and if I could do a life all over again, I would bother my mom about being in camp more. But for me, I think it was some something that's always kind of stuck with me was the I guess the exposure to different things that I've always had. Like my scholarship for college was something called the Posse Foundation, where the shortest version I can explain it, where a group of 10 people from the city of Chicago, different schools, different parts of the city, come together 6 months to a year before and talk about what college life will be like. And then you go to college with those 10 people, the same university. That's amazing. I think that's really what stuck with me because something I'm really big on is teamwork and working together to accomplish things and realizing that our differences make us stronger within a team. And you need a person to kind of guide and get everyone there. You need a strong leader in the middle, of course. But I really like I've always been really big on teamwork and doing things together and being inclusive on everything. And that's really why, I think why I've grown the podcast way that I have, but also just had been open to seeing the world the way that I have. Because I think it does take a special mindset to decide to book a flight, but then get on the flight and then go somewhere where you may not speak the language, you may not be able to find food right away and be okay with that.
Mhm.
And again, as a tourist, maybe not, but as to live like for 6 months to a year to 11 years, like it is a huge difference.
Yeah.
So one of the final questions I wanted to ask, I know I said that earlier. This is actually one of the final questions, guys. I'm not lying, I promise. And it's not the alcohol talking. I am almost done with my beer, and it's really good. It was really strong. I told y'all, it's really strong. Little tipsy, but who's your and I asked this question before and I'm figuring out for myself too, who's your travel role model, like a person who anyone that like you look up to, is like, oh, when I think of travel and who inspired me, I kind of think of that person.
Wow, that's a great question. I might have to think about it a little bit. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that there's like, as I'm thinking, there's like multiple faces popping in my head. Because, like the woman who I traveled with in Thailand, she was so amazing. We were both teaching at the same school in Southeast Asia. We met in Thailand and decided to travel in Southeast Asia together. She was super type A. So before we would go anywhere, would have like full lists of every single site we had to see, everything we had to do. And so like I took a little bit of that. And then like Lillian, who's both of our bosses, I've talked to her a ton about traveling, and we've got to travel within the US together a little bit. And she's a lot more like kind of like fun about it. Like she's like, oh, like we should just try this bar, and took a little bit of that from her. And I think that like from my parents, I took some like appreciation for just like wandering and like seeing what I stumble across. And so I don't know if I have like one specific travel role model. But I think that I've been influenced throughout my life by other people who travel and have kind of taken some of that from them. Also, some of our pack up and go travelers,
Oh yeah.
the travel company that we work for, sometimes they write stuff in their survey and I'm like, oh, that's a really good mindset to be in when you travel. I remember seeing one survey that was like I love being out of my comfort zone, but I also like some semblance of routine. So in the morning, I like to go to a coffee shop. And I was thinking to myself, like, that's a really cool way to like, every morning I'm going to go to my coffee shop and I'm going to feel comfortable and then plan the rest of my day from there and kind of take myself out of my comfort zone. So not a great answer to your question, but sort of all over the place.
That makes sense. And, you know, I have what I have learned from our travelers that, you know, reading all those surveys that we read. It's you can celebrate things with travel, and the positive and the negative. Like, oh, graduation celebration, yay! Divorce, double yay! It's like you can celebrate anything with travel, and travel can be and is a reward. And you can look at it like that. I think that's kind of what pushed people to even get out more, because maybe if you didn't graduate, you wouldn't travel. So like use that as an excuse. If you're trying to find an excuse to spend $1,000 or $500 or $200, no matter where you're going,
Yeah.
use travel as that. It's a great excuse to go out and see things. And I think I'm very similar to you, where the very first person that took me to Thailand on my very first trip that wasn't, you know, through school or something like that was Brad. And Brad was like, he would plan the flights and the hotel, but nothing else. So it was like I knew I would get there safely and get home safely, but the in between, that was on me. And he was really good with like directions and maps, and I was
Right.
not. I'm not a nope. I get lost and I walk around for 2 hours, but I get back home eventually, and I'm gonna have a lot of fun along the way. That's me. And then Lacey, who she's a friend that I actually met in Taiwan. But when I met her, she was like she was a woman. She was like, yeah, she literally quit her job and did whatever made her happy. But I went out for her downtown for like lunch one day, and she was like, yeah, I don't really like this job. I was like, oh man, what's going on? How can I help you? Yeah, I just quit. Like she texted him and said, I quit. I'm like, you just quit? And she was
I
like,
love
yeah,
that.
I'm going to move to New Zealand next month. And she's still in New Zealand right now. She's married and has a baby. Like, but that's how her, and I was like, man, what kind of sorcery is that? But she was like, I just live based on how I feel. If I don't feel good, I'm going to change it. And
I
I take
love
a little
that.
bit of that, but I don't think I can do that.
You know, the
Not
people
now.
in my life who have like the lives that I'm most envious of tend to be the ones who kind of live like that. Who are like, yeah, I don't like this thing, so I'm going to change it. And it's I think that's really scary for a lot of people, including myself. But I think that at the end of the day, ultimately, like that's why we're here, right? To just kind of try it all out and see what works, see what doesn't, and move on.
Yeah, it's just the instantaneous. It was so instant. I was like, really? And then it was a Hooters in Taiwan. Went to Hooters and had chicken wings. It was amazing. It was a great day. We went to a club. Anyway, well, thank you so much, Jordan. This is an amazing conversation. I have so many more questions with them, things we can talk on. So hope to have you back on the show at some point during the year, whenever you have time. But thank you so much. Anything else you'd like to leave us with? Any other questions, comments, anything?
Nothing else. Just thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'd also love to talk again soon on one of these. It's very fun, and definitely finished my drink, so I'll have to get more.
Hey, well, you guys know how it is. Thank you so much, Jordan. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, listening, watching, wherever you are. Thank you for tying one on with myself and Jordan. On behalf of, I'm on the wrong podcast, you guys. This is mine. I say that on the Pack Up and Go podcast, which if you haven't, subscribe to Envelopes of Expiration. It's an amazing podcast because I'm on it and Jordan's on it and a bunch of amazing people are on it too. But thank you guys for tying one on with me. I'm Carl, the Black Expat. You guys know what time it is. Have one last drink for this episode with me. I save like a little corner usually. The drink was so good. Hey, until next time, guys, you know what time it is. We out here.